So I've been privileged to be asked by Chris Friel to print the images for his latest exhibition, which is to be held through September and October up on the Isle of Harrison Lewis at Stornoway. He's exhibiting with Alex Boyd and Ragnar Axelsson, and he's selected 49 images for the exhibition, so it's a very large exhibition. I'll be printing the images on photospeed platinum baryta paper, and Chris has decided to exhibit the images just purely printed on the paper with no frames, no mounts. He's just fixing the images straight to the wall, so the prints will be very immediate and very tactile. People will be able to get very up close. There'll be no glass in between the viewer and the images. These images are very, really full of emotion, and that's not surprising really, as many of you will probably know. Very sadly, last year, Chris's son Joe took his own life after a year-long struggle with mental illness, and these images were taken just a few days after that. Joe really loved the Isles of Harrison Lewis, and Chris took himself up there just to have a couple of days alone to visit some of the places that him and Joe enjoyed together. And these images are the ones that he made while he was there, and we can only perhaps begin to imagine the grief that Chris was feeling at the time. And I think when you look at these images, you can begin to see the grief that Chris was experiencing, and it's reflected very much in the nature of these photographs, and it really captures a sense of the place as well. But I don't think you can divorce what was happening in Chris's life from what you see in the photographs. He's chosen to show them in black and white, and I think distilling out the colour of the landscape really helps to bring the way he was feeling so distraught at the time. It really helps bring that to the fore too. So these are extremely powerful, very emotional photographs that we're seeing here. And these photographs, if you were fortunate enough to obtain a copy of the book entitled Joe, which Chris produced, which was a record of Joe's life, interspersing these images with photographs of Joe as he was growing up that Chris made through his life, then you will be familiar with many of these images, and they work so beautifully with the precious images that Chris and his family have of Joe. But the images of Joe are not in the exhibition. These are purely landscape images of Harrison Lewis that are being shown here. What I want to do really is focus on the actual process of preparing for the exhibition and give you some of the insight into what goes into preparing for an exhibition. So what I've done initially is I've downloaded all 49 images from the back end of Chris's website, so I have access to that because I print all of Chris's work for him for his clients, and so I just access the files. Chris has put them all there and numbered them all in order for me. So we have a plan of the exhibition, so we know that the order that they've got to be hung in. Alex Boyd will be doing the hanging in advance of the exhibition up there. So as I produce each print, I will number them on the back so that when I send them up by courier up to Stornoway, Alex knows the hanging plan, and he can tie the images into the hanging plan very easily. So that side of things has to be carefully thought out and organised, because there's a flow to the images. They need to be hung in the correct order. They can't just be randomly put on the wall. So what I've done, first of all, just to give you an idea, I've just pulled the images down from Chris's website onto my hard drive. I've created a folder. You can see that over here on the left hand side in Lightroom here. Here I've got a folder called Friel. You can see I had an exhibition I did for him a year or so ago called Memorial that I printed. and now I've created a folder on my hard drive called After Exhibition, and I've put the images into that folder. You see the 49 images, and I've now imported that folder into Lightroom. That's a standard procedure if you're used to Lightroom. No need for me to run through that. That's not really the purpose of this video, to show you that kind of thing. So here we have the images that are going to be in the exhibition here, and if I just increase the size of the thumbnails, you'll be able to see some of the work here. Now these aren't in the order that they'll be shown in. These have just been organised by file name by Lightroom at the moment, but you can see that I'm going to be using a lot of black ink as I produce these. So I mentioned that we'll be using Photospeed's Platinum Baryta paper. Why are we using Platinum Baryta paper for these images? Well, we did a number of tests on a number of different papers. I printed on several different papers for Chris, Photospeed's papers and one or two other manufacturers as well, because he wanted to see which papers performed best, and I sent those down. So we did the same images. We picked a couple of images and I printed them all on all of the papers, sent them down to him in a pack, and he evaluated those. I knew which one I preferred, but Chris, obviously, as the artist, wants to make his choice, and he came back and he'd selected Platinum Baryta as his favourite paper out of those. And the reason being was it was probably closest to a sort of a C-type print. Platinum Baryta, especially with black and white images like these, will give intense, rich, deep blacks, and will produce the highlights really beautifully. It hasn't got a high shiny surface. It's got a slight sheen to it like a C-type print, but it's not highly glossy like a gloss paper, so it's not too reflective. Much less reflective than any sort of print, matte or otherwise, gloss or otherwise, behind glass. So you get a nice contrast, and as you can see from these images, they are very, very high contrast images. And some of the papers that we tried just didn't reproduce the blacks with enough depth and didn't render the contrast adequately. And we got the best results on Platinum Baryta, and I agree with that. That was the paper I was hoping Chris would choose, but it was down to him at the end of the day. I don't know how Chris has produced these images. If any of you have got questions about that, Chris has his own techniques and his own methods. How much of this is done in camera, how much is done in post-processing, I don't know. It may be done entirely in camera. I suspect that there is some work on computer as well, but that is entirely down to Chris, and I leave that entirely up to him. That's a private matter, and I'm not really interested in how he achieves it. That's the process for the artist as far as I'm concerned. It's more about the image for me, and I think these are entirely appropriate given the circumstances, and capture the atmosphere of the place and also the emotions of the photographer at the time, and I think that's really important. These are incredibly powerful images to me, both from the point of view of knowing the story behind them, but even if you were to divorce that, and I don't think you should, but even if you were to divorce the story from the images, if ever you've been to Harris and Lewis in what could we call it? Maybe foul weather. You know, in winter weather, in stormy bad weather. These really capture that place in these kind of conditions. So often we see Harris and Lewis portrayed with turquoise waters and white sand, almost with a sort of Barbadian feel to the place. But it can be a wild, wild and desolate place as well. This captures this side of the islands, and that has a real depth of beauty of its own. And these images have a certain beauty to them as well, a certain evocative beauty to them, but a heavy, heavy sadness too, a real melancholy and a real depth of sadness to them. And I think that's appropriate, very, very appropriate. Chris has done an incredible thing here. And it takes great courage for a photographer to open up his heart and his soul like this, and to show the depths of his emotions in a photograph, and not to just show the pretty side of a landscape, but to show the dark side of the landscape, and to really show the landscape in the raw, like this. So I think it's going to be an incredible exhibition, and certainly one that is well worth travelling to see. I'm very fortunate that I'm going to be up on the islands at the time the exhibition is on, and I'm really looking forward to going to see the exhibition. So my next stage now is to take the first image, and I'm going to do some tests on it. So I'm going to look at the sharpening of the image, which is going to have to be done very carefully, because when you look at these images, there are whole areas. If we just let's just bring one. Let's just take this image for example, and I'll just bring it up full screen for you. We'll go into the develop module. If you look at an image like this, there are areas of sharpness. So if you look in here, you can see that there are textural details. Not many certainly, but these textural details need to be sharp. And then there are whole areas which are very, very soft. And these areas need to have their softness maintained. So sharpening is going to be very, very tricky on these images, and I'm going to have to be very careful about how I handle that. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time doing sharpening, very carefully sharpening these images. So I'm going to do some tests on one or two images and work out how I'm going to approach that, and then I'll talk you through how I'm going to do that once I've come up with a plan. I'm also going to look at whether I need to do any work, just making some corrections with the printer. Do I need to do any lightening or darkening to the images in order to get them to come out on the paper correctly? I'm working on a calibrated monitor, an ISO monitor, so hopefully what I see is what I get coming out of the printer, but sometimes I may need to do some tweaking. So I might need to just do some test prints, just to fine-tune the print settings and get everything right as regards my paper profiles and so on. So I will pick one or two representative images to do that, one or two of the much darker images, one or two that are in the sort of mid to lighter tone images in amongst them to give me some guidelines. And that should then enable me maybe to create some presets, or maybe I will need to work on each image individually. I'll have to have a look through and make my mind up. My preference is usually to work on every image individually, and looking at these, there's a wide variety of sort of textures and things like that in these. So it may be that I do have to work through every one individually, but it's important to get every print right for clients, and so I'm more than prepared to do that. So do some experimentation, get everything dead right, and then I'll set about producing the prints. There's 49 to do. They have to be done very methodically, in order. I'll print them from 1 to 49 in the order that they're going to be exhibited, to keep everything orderly, number them on the back, and then they'll need to cure properly, make sure that I'm absolutely happy with them before that they're packed and dispatched off to Stornoway for Alex Boyd to get hung up at the exhibition there. And I'll just do one or two little videos just to take you through some of those things once I've ironed out the technical differences, and hopefully that will be of interest to you. Then when I'm up on the island, I will also do a little video for you up there, hopefully, and some commentary of the exhibition itself, just to complete the circle. But if you're doing black and white prints, whether they're as dark as this and as contrasty as this, or whether they're more maybe more, what should I say, normal black and white prints, more of sort of standard tonal range, I can highly recommend you try the Photospeed Platinum Baryta paper. It's absolutely superb, and it's my paper of choice at the moment for black and white printing. Okay, hope you found that useful, and I'll continue on a little bit later with this and just pick up where I've left off. But I'm just going to pause the recording for now. Thanks. Bye.